Hey everybody, it's time for This Week in Science and Education. This is Thursday, March the 14th, and this is your host, Kevin Kugler. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Phillip Jessup, and for those of you who are keeping track, this is episode 89, It's Not Easy Being Green. Dr. Jessup, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. I'd like to start off by just indicating a little bit of your past experience and where you're coming from today. As I understand it, you're from Queen's University. You're a Canada Research Chair of Green Chemistry in the Departments of Chemistry and Environmental Studies, but you're also the Technical Director of Green Centre Canada. We're hoping we're going to get into that a little bit today because I think it's absolutely fascinating what's going on at the Green Centre, so I'm looking forward to that discussion. Thank you so much for joining us, and why don't you lead it off by just telling us a little bit about who you are and the nature of your research.
All right. Well, I'm very happy to be here and join in this effort. I'm a professor of chemistry, and my field of research is green chemistry. So we're trying to make chemical processes that are used in industry a lot less damaging to the environment. Because everybody still wants the products and the medicine and the cars and toys, but we don't want the pollution. So how can you have all those products and not get the pollution at the same time? So that's the area I'm in. And my particular research is in the area of solvents. Liquids like water or turpentine or whatever that will dissolve things. You can separate things. But the problem is a lot of these solvents damage the environment because they're volatile. That means they evaporate. They go into the air and they cause smog and toxicity problems to workers and they catch fire. So all these things are bad about solvents. So we're trying to design solvents that don't do that. They're not volatile. They're not flammable. They're not going to evaporate and get into the lungs of the workers or into the air to make smog. So that's the area of research that I study. And I also try to make it so that these green inventions, when they happen, will actually get into industry. Because if we just make a great invention and it sounds great, and everybody loves it, and that's all that ever happens, then the environment doesn't benefit. What we really need is to get these technologies into industry, get them using them, and get rid of the old dirty ways of doing things. And that's when the environment benefits and the economy benefits too.
So can you give us an example of something students can hang on to? So is there something that we've done right in the last 10 years where we've moved to a less harmful solvent or solution in the household that people would say, put that in context?
In the household, people have used things like turpentine for cleaning your paintbrushes and that kind of thing. People used to use oil-based paints. You know, when you're painting the walls or painting whatever in your house, use oil-based paints. Oil-based paints have a lot of these volatile solvents in that are really bad, and you don't want to inhale that. But now people are using these water-based paints. They're called latex paints, and it's a lot better for your health, a lot better for the environment.
That's awesome. So is that really the driving force behind latex paints? I always thought it was just simplicity, but is it really also that much better for the environment?
It is. The amount of volatile organic compounds coming out into the air, and you're breathing it in, it's a lot better for using the water-based paints. And it's also easier to clean up, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. So you mentioned that this is an industrial scale. Do you have a feel for what the relative contribution is between, say, household solvents and industrial solvents? I mean, is there a numbers reason that you focus on industry?
By far the biggest problem is the industrial solvents. There are things that consumers are doing that are really bad, but the solvents problem is mostly an industrial problem. For example, one solvent that's a real problem is called hexane, and hexane is a solvent that's used to make vegetable oil. So anytime you're cooking with vegetable oil in the kitchen, that was extracted with hexane. But the emissions to the atmosphere, to air of hexane, is more from that than it is from the oil, gas, the coal, the oil sands, all that. It's more from vegetable oil than from those guys.
Wow.
That is a hidden cost. I mean, and that's so this idea of hidden cost, I think, is a big deal. I mean, a lot of the shift to greener technologies. I mean, I would have never thought that that more use of vegetable oil would actually have a detrimental effect on the environment. I mean, do you have other sort of startling examples like that? That this is something that you would think vegetable oil is innocuous. I mean, this is not something I would have classed in environmental hazard. Yeah. So, I mean, what else are doing that has these kind of impacts that we just don't know about?
Well, it's not actually the vegetable oil, it's the solvent they use to get the vegetable oil. That's the problem. But other
Right.
things like, there's another famous solvent called acetone. And if you ever go through a shopping mall and you go past one of those spas where they're doing the fingernails, you can smell the acetone out in the hallway. That stuff is really flammable. And there was a plant in Quebec City that exploded in December of last December, and people were killed, and the place was destroyed. And the dangerous chemical they were using was acetone, which people that work in the lab, we think acetone's pretty harmless, but light a match and it's not. It's really dangerous.
Okay, so
Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, Colin, go ahead.
okay, thanks. Okay, so we've talked about a couple of these potential problems, hexane and acetone. How do we then get a new process? What takes do you guys take then at your center to say replace hexane in the manufacturing of vegetable oil? What is your process for looking at other ways of doing this?
Okay, so the big thing about hexane and acetone, and the reason why companies use them, is because they're easy to separate. Once you've done you're making a vegetable oil or whatever, you can heat up the sample and the solvent evaporates, and then you leaves behind your vegetable oil. That's easy. It takes energy, and it requires the solvent to be flammable and volatile and all those nasty things, but it works. That's why industry uses them. So we figure the best way to get rid of these dangerous solvents is to find a better way to remove the solvent. If you can find a way to remove the solvent from the product that does not require this heating up and evaporating, but some other way, then the industry won't have to use these volatile solvents anymore. So we designed some solvents that you can pull out of the product by using carbonated water. This is like club soda pop, without the sugar.
Excellent.
And that stuff there. So we use soda pop basically to pull the solvent away from the product. And because we're not using heat and evaporation, we don't have to use anything that's volatile. So our solvents are not flammable. They're not going to cause smog. They're not going to get inhaled by workers.
So is that a chemical reaction of some sort, or is it like a physical separation? How does that work? Sort of that way.
It's a chemical reaction. Soda pop, the carbon dioxide in water is acidic, and so we're using solvents that are a little bit basic, and they will react with the acidic carbonated water and get attracted by it, and that pulls it out of the product. And then later on, when we want to get our solvent back out of the water, all we need to do is make the pop go flat, right? Get rid of the CO2, and suddenly our solvent doesn't want to have anything to do with this water anymore, and it comes out. So we can get our solvent back.
So is this a proof of concept? Where are you in the process of making this work and applying it?
Well, we've proved it works in beakers, and then we've gone on and we've taken it to Green Center Canada. They've developed into further, and they've made a company called Switchable Solutions, and they're going on to develop this for applications like oil sands. That's a really big application.
Yeah. I mean, so the scaling up on that is going to be pretty monstrous.
Yep.
So when we talk to kids about this, what's the kind of background that people that are working with you? I was scrolling through all the people that have graduated from your lab. What's the kind of background that you're looking for in students? What do they need to get out of undergrad? So what do they need to get out of high school now to prepare them for undergrad and then prepare them for this kind of work?
Well, from high school, they need to have to take chemistry, physics, math, and that'll prepare them for getting into a chemistry or chemical engineering program at university. And then coming out of there to grad school, they really need to have, a bachelor's in chemistry or chemical engineering.
Right.
What's the job in this area? Sorry, Thomas. I'm just wondering, building on those student questions, what are the job prospects for a student in this area?
Oh, very good. Because we're trying to solve problems that industry cares a lot about. I mean, industry doesn't want to be polluting. They hate pollution. They want to be able to solve it. They want to make the processes more efficient, and they don't like bad press. All these things are forcing them to think about improving the process. The students I train, they're working on solving those problems. So then when they've done that and they go out to industry, they say, well, we've already worked on industrial problems. We've come up with solutions. That's very appealing to future employers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Do you work with industry at all? I mean, is there do your students co-op or anything like that? So I was just at an industry and genomics meeting last week, and we were talking at that meeting about how to get students more into an industrial setting to get a better dialogue going between industry and academia. So how do you balance that in your own work?
Yeah, quite a few of my students are working on projects that are partly funded by industry, and so they will actually collaborate with the industry representatives to design it, to figure out what the real applications are, figure out what the real problems are. There's always a risk that people in academia who are a little out of touch with industry, we could imagine problems and try and solve them, and they won't actually be real problems. So we have to work with industry. Go ahead.
That's an awesome point. I mean, what are the real questions? And I've run into this trying to do industrial collaborations myself. I know what I find interesting in science, but that's not necessarily what industry needs to know. Do you find that industry, so the other thing we talked about at this meeting was that industry oftentimes doesn't know what science is capable of. And so we were talking about how do we get industry up to speed on what the technological possibilities are while we get academia up to speed on what the real needs are in industry.
Exactly.
Do you find that you have that conversation with industry?
Yeah, absolutely. None of these industry partners realized that it was possible to pull a solvent out with soda pop. And so if you had asked them, is that what you want, they would never have thought of it, right? So it's professors and their students have to come up with these ideas and then go to industry and say, well, we can do this now. What's that worth to you? I mean, is there something that will really help? What application? That kind of thing,
Yeah, and that kind of dialogue is awesome. I mean, the fact that you've been that successful is a testament to if nothing else, creativity. This is not a standard way to do things, and to get that kind of dialogue going is a pretty neat feat. How do we get them jobs? And if they're already interacting with industry, you're not having that conversation. They know where the jobs are.
It sounds like you found a really nice balance between industry completely driving what the science is doing, or the other flip side of that is, pure science for the sake of science and not really having a direction. Like, we've talked to a lot of different researchers who have gone back and forth on that, but this to me sounds like you're looking to industry to provide you some very interesting problems, and then you go off in your research and try and solve those problems. So I think it's a really neat balance, and from a student going through, exactly what Thomas just said, to be able to work on problems that are presented with the dialogue with industry, it's not only marketable skills, it's also then making an impact, and they can see what they're doing has a bigger benefit than just playing with whatever interests them in their lab. So I think you found a really nice balance there at the Green Center and through your research.
So what do we need to be doing better? You've been doing this for a while. You've watched things change. How can we do a better job of doing the things that you're doing well now?
Well, there's a number of things that have to happen. Like, for example, green chemistry, it's not being taught at the universities, right? A little bit of this kind of stuff is getting into the high school curriculums, but it's not at universities. Very few universities in Canada offer training in how to make things green or sustainable. And the other problem is, if you do have that training and if you do that research going, we don't have mechanisms in society to get these inventions to industry. It's very difficult to do that. And that's why we created Green Center Canada, is to try and fix that.
Okay.
You mentioned green chemistry in university and in high school. As someone who works with chemistry teachers, what can we say to chemistry teachers about the kinds of things they do in grade 11 and 12 that would be sort of in that green chemistry kind of way? Is it a matter of presenting environmental problems to understand, the chemical process behind it, or is there something deeper with sort of green chemistry as a title that high school teachers could be doing?
Well, I think presenting problems and how to solve them, or how they have been solved in the recent past, is great. But I do think the most important thing you can tell the students is that there are ways to decide what's the right thing to do, right? So if we assume that everybody is motivated to do the right thing, that's not good enough. You have to know how, right? So supposing in the future you're going to grow up and you're going to be a plant manager, you're going to design a new chemical plant, and your heart's in the right place, and you've got like 3 different ways of making this product. How do you decide which one is the one that does less damage, right? You can't go into the details on it in a high school level, but there are ways to do that. You can quantify how much damage is being done by each of the choices, and then you choose the greenest one. And that concept, I think, is really important for future chemists to know as early as possible.
But do we also have to be pushing that at a societal level, that inches industry towards that and gives them more of a reward for using the green options. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all a financial bottom line, and even with good intentions, if it's more expensive, that's going to be a hard argument for a manager to make. So what do we need to do as Canadians or as citizens of the planet to push that?
Well, a lot of the companies are a little more green than the public might expect based on, reading the newspaper. Like in my negotiations with companies on these solvents, I always thought that the first question out of their mouths would be, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
Right? Because the bottom line would be their motivating factor. It's usually not. Usually the first question that comes out of their mouths is it biodegradable? Right? Is it going to persist? And does it kill all the fish in the sea? Right? That's the kind of thing they want to know. And that's really pleasing to hear as a Canadian. The companies do care about this. Now the question is, why do they care? Yeah. Right? It's not just motivation and having your heart in the right place. It's because of regulations. They want to be able to operate in every jurisdiction, every country, and then the greener their stuff is, the more they'll be able to operate in all these different places. So as Canadians, I think we should be telling our government we want some things to be restricted, and we're okay with that.
Dr. Jessop, I'm going to interject for a second. I think it's a real testimony to how interesting you are as a guest for two reasons. The first is these two guys have been talking over each other for like the last 20 minutes. And the second is I have not been allowed to ask a single question. So I'm going to reserve my right as a co-host here and get one question in before we have to let you go in about 5 minutes. Here's my question. You said something interesting a couple minutes ago where you said that the high schools are starting to adapt or integrate green chemistry into their programs, but the universities have not. Green chemistry, to me, from a layman's perspective, seems to be on trend, seems to be important. It's something we need to be considering. It seems like it has a lot of solutions, a lot of answers for a lot of our environmental problems. What do you think are the barriers to having universities adopt these programs or adopt this into their curriculum of education, if you will?
I think there's two barriers. One is the philosophical barrier. There's a lot of people who feel that if you're doing anything applied, that's not real science, especially older faculty, or, everything has to be fundamental basic research or it's not worth doing. And green chemistry is most definitely quite applied, right? Mm-hmm. But those folks are retiring and then they'll be gone in a little bit. So I don't think that one will go away. The other problem is more practical. The undergrad curriculum for university is already chock full of courses. If you're going to bring in a new course, say green chemistry, you have to get rid of one. You can't just add more courses on because the students are already fully tasked. So which one do you get rid of? And that can be a politically hard game to play. It's like, let's get rid of this course. And of course, the people that love that topic say, no, let's not get rid of that one. So that's a real practical problem that is a real impediment.
Thank you.
And that's the same thing in high school. And I think your previous answer starts to get towards a possible solution. Is it's maybe the how of teaching the various specific courses through a problem-solving approach and one that may be an issues-based approach, because any chemical process you can find, an analog somewhere out in industry that's a problem waiting to be solved. So maybe it's a style of teaching versus the topic of teaching that needs to be sort of thought about in terms of change. So I think you've given us some food for thought around that too. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thomas, last question of the day goes to you, my friend.
I'm listening to what you're saying about the movement of curriculum, and one of the things that we're dealing with up here is students go in directions based on fad. So like forensic sciences at the moment is this enormous thing because everybody's been watching CSI. And I wonder if we'll be able to promote things like green chemistry as Canadians become more and more aware of environmental issues, that there'll be a push into that. We have seen more and more students moving into applied fields as the job market stays difficult. And we very rarely see professors say, I can guarantee you a job in your discipline. So that may end up being a driving force behind pushing students into things like the green chemistry. But I think Colin makes a good point, too. There are lots of different ways that we can look at trying to integrate that into the curriculum. And that was more of a statement than a question. I'm sort of stuck on what do we need to do next? And how do we get past, you've got a great center, to we get students thinking about this on a broader scale, outside of just your area at Queens?
Well, I encourage my students to have an idea book. I think what we really need is lots of creativity and lots of innovation from students, rather than just doing what they're told. So I tell my students, have an idea, get a blank book get a book from the bookstore, and then every time you have an idea, no matter how bad it might be, write it down, right? And every time you listen to a seminar or a podcast and you hear an idea, combine that with something else you already know to make a new idea and write it down. And after a while, you're going to have a blank book that's full of really bad ideas, at least 90% of them, and 10% of them will be really big winners. And that's a really good way, I think, for people to be more creative and innovative, and that's what we really need for the future.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Dr. Jessup, I'm afraid we've reached the maximum time that we have allocated to talk with you today, but that certainly doesn't mean after we end this recording that we can't spend the rest of the day, the four of us, just talking about these issues, and maybe we should do that. It's been absolutely my pleasure, and I believe I speak on behalf of Thomas and Colin as well. It's been great fun talking to you, and thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
It was fun.
Thanks a lot.
Dr. Phillip Jessup was our guest today on This Week in Science and Education. He joined us from Queen's University, where he holds the distinction of Canada Research Chair and is also the Technical Director at Green Centre Canada. Join us again, same time next week, everybody. Thanks to my co-host as usual. And I apologize, it's not next week. We're monthly now. Join us next month. Everybody, have a great few days. Bye-bye now.